Race, colleges, affirmative action has always been a huge issue in America. Black folks have been left out of our universities for quite some time. But one of the things that changed that was universities being forced with affirmative action to diversify, to include more of us. So yesterday, of course, on this show, we talked about the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law going after the Trump Department of Justice because they are trying to investigate Harvard University and their admissions policies. Now, they don't care about criminal justice reform. They don't care about cops losing their mind. No, they're more focused on affirmative action because in their minds, they believe that, oh my goodness, all of these white kids are losing opportunities. You still might remember there was a white woman who sued the University of Texas saying it was because of those blacks and Latinos that she could not get into the University of Texas. Well, when they went all the way to the Supreme Court, where she lost, they discovered that there were other white students who had lower grades than her who got in. See, that's what happens in America. They sort of just blame them. It's got to be them. They're the reason I didn't get in. Nah, it could be you. And so we talked about this on yesterday. I wanted to play this for you because this took place in 2004 at the Unity Journalists of Color Convention here in Washington, D.C. 4 of us, Native Americans, Hispanics, Asians, African American journalists, got a chance to ask questions of President George W. Bush. NABJ chose me to represent the National Association of Black Journalists. And at this time, the Michigan affirmative action case was going before the United States Supreme Court. So I chose to ask Bush about it.
Mr. President, you said, quote, quotas are an unfair system for all, unquote, with regards to your opposition to affirmative action.
No, whoa. With regard to my opposition to quota systems.
To quotas, okay. But I've never heard you speak against legacy. Now, the president of Texas A&M, Robert Gates, said that he would not use race in admissions, and then he later said he would not use legacy. If you say it's a matter of merit and not race, shouldn't colleges also get rid of legacy? And because that's not based upon merit, that's based upon if my daddy or my granddaddy went to my college.
Yeah, I thought you were referring to my legacy.
That's why I allowed you to go ahead and bring it out.
Yeah. Well, in my case, I had to knock on a lot of doors to follow the old man's footsteps. No, look, if what you're saying is there going to be special treatment for people, we're going to have a special exception for certain people in a system that's supposed to be fair, I agree. I don't think there ought to be.
So the colleges should get rid of legacy?
Well, I think so, yeah. I think it ought to be based upon merit, and I think it also be based upon... And I think colleges need to work hard for diversity. No, don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get me wrong. You said against affirmative action is what you said. You put words in my mouth. What I am for is diversity.
I just read the speech, Mr. President.
What speech?
In terms of when you came out against the Michigan affirmative action policy.
No, I said I was against quotas.
So you support affirmative action but not quotas?
I support colleges affirmatively taking action to get more minorities in their school.
That's a long headline, Mr. President.
I support diversity. I don't support quotas. I think quotas are wrong. I think quotas are wrong for people.
But
and so do a lot of people.
But just to be clear, you believe that colleges should not use legacy?
I think colleges ought to use merit in order for people to get in, and I think they ought to use a merit system like the one I put out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thanks for having me.
5 seconds. All right, folks, joining us now via Skype from Nashville, Tennessee is Tim Wise, an anti-racism activist. Tim, after that questioning of President George W. Bush, the New York Times did a story, and the next day, Yale, Harvard, all those colleges, they got tons of phone calls from concerned folks there saying, oh my goodness, are y'all going to get rid of legacy? And it's amazing how a lot of these people who love talking about affirmative action don't want anybody to touch legacy, where white students today are benefiting from segregation because they're getting a leg up when African Americans and Hispanics can't use legacy because our parents and grandparents couldn't have gone to those schools.
Right. Well, yeah, and this has been an issue for a long time that very few people want to talk about. There are about twice as many at elite colleges, about twice as many white students who are getting into these schools with lower test scores, frankly, than the average, with lower grade point averages than the average, but who were getting in either because of direct legacy, that is to say a parent or grandparent went to that school, or because of some other type of connections or pulling strings. There are twice as many of those whites getting in despite lower qualifications and having connections than there are black and brown folks getting in with even a little bit of help from affirmative action. So clearly, when folks file lawsuits claiming either that white people like Abigail Fisher were supposedly disadvantaged because of affirmative action, or this new lawsuit against Harvard, which is trying to make Asian Americans the victims and saying that they're being bumped, what's being ignored is that, in fact, whatever bumping is happening usually on behalf of better connected, richer white people. That's what we need to be talking about on behalf of all people of color, and I should point out, on behalf of working class white folks as well, who often are bumped because their daddy doesn't know the right person. It hurts everyone except the very elite.
Well, and that's what's interesting, because you have these same working class white folks who love them some Donald Trump, but Jared Kushner's daddy bought his way into Harvard.
Right.
We see that all the time. And again, it is amazing to me when you talk to folks. Again, they can't stand affirmative action. They can't stand the use of race even having a factor in it. But then they say, oh, no, 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 don't you touch legacy. And then you hear people say, well, slavery was such a long time ago. I keep reminding them, if you are a student today and legacy is being used in admissions, you today are benefiting directly from Jim Crow.
Right. But let me also say this. It's not just legacy. Here's the thing. When you are, on average, we know, for instance, that the SAT and other standardized test scores, the biggest single correlation with that is your zip code, right? As in where you live, the quality of the school that you attended K through 12. So ultimately, it isn't just formal legacy. We have such a profoundly unequal K-12 system that by definition, you are going to have a disproportionate number of white folks who are going to test better because they had better access. You're going to have a disproportionate number of black and brown folks who test lower, irrespective of their real potential. So even that, even using a quote unquote traditional merit criteria, when the history and the context within which we accumulate merit is not equal, actually perpetuates injustice. Colleges have got to be free to examine merit in a broad way. And part of that means if I'm a person of color and I've overcome obstacles, or a poor white person for that matter, and I've overcome obstacles to get that, let's say, 1100 on the SAT. No, it may not be a 1500, but that's more impressive. Getting an 1100 where I didn't have any AP classes, I didn't have any honors classes, right, is a lot more impressive than somebody getting a 14 or a 1500 at a prep school. So we got to let colleges think about merit in a holistic way that actually produces equity and diversity, not this traditional way that basically privileges the privileged.
And that's what we're seeing here. And this is also, to me, where you begin. But see, I'm going to change that. Tim, but it even goes further than that. In Texas, when they had the Hopwood decision there, where race was even more so used in the current method. Same thing, right. A lawsuit against the University of Texas. The Fifth Circuit ruled against the University of Texas. They went back and changed it. So here's what happened. The black legislators said, okay, we got to figure something out. Then they realized that, to your point earlier, the rural white kids were not getting into the University of Texas, Texas A&M, Texas Tech, North Texas, the major state universities. So the minority legislators got with the rural white legislators and said, we're going to do top 10%. That is, if you finish in the top 10% of your graduating class, that's best of the best, you will be automatically admitted to any state university in Texas. Well, guess what happened? Those rich white parents said, well, wait a minute. My child goes to a much more rigorous school. And so it's unfair for that less than poor white kid or black kid or Hispanic kid to get into the University of Texas because my child takes 3 and 4 AP honors classes. So what did they do? The University of Texas had them slash the number of people who were admitted under the top 10 by saying, well, you know, we don't have enough room to be able to pick more different students. And so even when you have a non-race-based model, you still have rich white parents or well-to-do white parents who still say, nah, we ain't down with this because they getting the hookup and we're not.
Right. Yeah, there's a mentality of entitlement among the affluent students who go to prep schools. And again, keep in mind, these kids like Abigail Fisher or whoever it is, the fact that they went to a quote unquote more rigorous school and took more AP class, they didn't earn that. They got born into a family that could afford that. How in the world is somebody entitled to that education? You got lucky. You're no more entitled to that than someone else is to blame for the fact that they got born in a rural, poor area or in the hood or wherever it is. And so we've got to have an entire rethink about, we always talk about poor folks having an entitlement mentality and people of color having an entitlement mentality. The entitlement mentality in this country is rich white folks who are upset that apparently it's not enough to get a gentleman's C at Yale the way that some former presidents were able to do, or it's not enough to pull some strings and take all the good slots, or it's not enough in Donald Trump's case, even though he wasn't born as affluent, let's say, as George W. Bush, to be able to get into Penn Business School because the admissions officer allowed a transfer from Fordham or wherever he was because he knew his brother or something. I mean, this is what rich white folks always do, and then they blame black folks and brown folk for not getting enough of the goodies that they used to get when actually it's other white folks who were taking their stuff.
Tim Wise, always a pleasure. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
You bet, man.
Our panel, A. Scott Bolden, legal analyst, chairman of the National Bar Association PAC, Pastor Shannon Wright, third vice chair of the Maryland GOP, Robert Patillo, attorney and host of CBS Radio Atlanta. Again, I tell you, it's always hilarious to me when I see this conversation, and I'm going, y'all act like y'all ain't got the hookup.
But let's say all that's true. Great discussion, right? Fairly one-sided. But if none of that works,
how was it one-sided? It was true.
It was true. So truth has that side.
Right. But you got to make it sound. You sound like Trump with the two sides.
Well, no. What I'm saying is that all makes sense. The admissions process in colleges across this country is difficult enough. I agree with everything that was said in that interview, right? So then what's the answer? What was missing from that interview is, what's the answer? How do you make it more fair for everybody?
No, first of all,
top three
okay, first of all, okay, here's the first thing, okay? Let's get rid of this nonsense where it's more fair for everybody. Because college is the end of the process, Shannon and Robert, because here's the deal. If you screwed me from pre-K through 12th grade, don't act like all of a sudden we're on an even playing field. And I do believe that when you have predominantly white institutions that are predominantly white for a reason, which is the legacy of Jim Crow, white supremacy, and slavery, then you need to be able to utilize race in your admissions to say, wait a minute, let me look at how can I diversify my force. What's interesting is when I discussed the Michigan affirmative action case, who is one of the folks who signed different amicus briefs? Who was it? The military. You had Norman Schwarzkopf and others who were saying, in the military, we know what diversity and inclusion has meant. What you have here, you have folks who want to keep the same system. Let's have white students be able to go to the elite institutions or go to colleges, and the rest of y'all can go to trade schools, y'all can go do some other stuff, and this promotes the inequities in America.
That's the
Robert.
problem. What's the answer?
I think one of the big things that we have to do.
I just told you, allow race to be used. Go.
Well, one of the big things we have to realize is that the Supreme Court has ruled on this for the last 30 years, that race and diversity is a compelling interest. And what we have to make sure that when we're monitoring what Trump is doing with the Supreme Court, what he's doing with the over 100 federal judge vacancies that he has to fill, I think he's filled about 37 so far, is what their opinions are going to be on affirmative action going forward and what we can do to combat that, making sure we keep an eye on that. We always get distracted by the fireworks coming out of the White House, not realizing that we really have to be working on what's going on in the court system, filing those briefs, filing those lawsuits to keep them going. But also, let's make sure that we stop lionizing and pretending that their schools are better than ours. We have to be advocates for our HBCUs, advocates to get the best and brightest into our schools, because guess what? The most racist school on earth will go get the fastest running back in the country, regardless of color. They'll get the tallest person who can dunk a basketball, shoot a three, no matter what. So how about they come to us because we're producing the best and brightest at our own HBCUs, and make sure we concentrate in-house on building up our communities.
Shannon?
You know, I listened to a lot of what you gentlemen said, and you in particular, I'm sorry. How are we supposed to get the best and the brightest in our schools, HBCUs, right? When the schools that are educating our kids don't teach them in a lot of cases how to read or do arithmetic. So you want to look at the college level, but you got to make that education thing a multi-pronged approach. You got to go back You got to make sure that no. You got to make sure that child is going into an elementary school, that when they come out, they are prepared.
Right now, we're talking about the context of higher education.
No. But she's right, and that's the problem with this whole discussion. We want to isolate colleges as if they're separate and distinct, but college is the end result. If you ignore high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools, then you're going to have the same problem in colleges, which is why when I did my school choice event down in Selma, Alabama, one of the few black female athletic directors, she said they're not even sending scouts to recruit athletes in Selma because of new NCAA requirements. They can't even make the grade. So to your point, we're even losing those opportunities because not being able to make the grade. And so we'll see what happens, of course, with this DOJ investigation.
Weekdays on TV One.
I will never lie to you.
Oh, my God.
Roland Martin.
He doesn't want to talk to us. He wants to ignore us.
Uncensored.
Hell no. That ain't gonna cut it, boo.
Unapologetic.
No, that is fundamentally false. You are wrong.
Unfiltered.
He wants an America where we all look alike. He ain't talking about black people.
Unrelenting.
You better go work out, because you got a fight on your hands.
NewsOne Now with Roland Martin. Weekdays at 7 a.m. on TV One.